mean, we have both the U.S. and Russia, if I understand this, who are willing to provide some measure of security for the inauguration. It ended up there was, like you say, hundreds of thousands of people came out. Would have been much harder to pull off something like they did on January 8th. But why? What was the theory behind the assault when nobody's in the buildings? What did, if somebody's paying homeless people to do this, there's obviously, this is not like a spontaneous, just sort of outpouring of angst and, the election integrity concerns. I mean, I have some question too, as to like what Bolsonaro's role was. I just remember like in the week or two before January 8th, we were looking at video of like, what's this dude walking around Orlando for? Like in a he's in a
VR headset, playing games.
He's playing games in a VR headset. He's like walking around in like a gated community. He's getting filmed in a grocery store. I mean, it really felt to me at the time like it just seemed incredibly strange. Like, this is not the behavior of somebody who just lost something, who wants to be like, why does he want to be seen this way? And on January 8th, I had an alternate theory as to why he wanted to be seen that way, because he wanted to be clear, like, I wasn't there, and I don't know, that's speculation on my part, but I just thought it was really weird beforehand. Like, this is not the behavior of someone who lost an election and is mad about it, and they're going grocery shopping. I don't know. I found that strange. So 2-part question. Like, one, why, when it was completely empty, like what was supposedly going to happen, do you think they were hoping would happen at that moment? And to what extent is there evidence that Bolsonaro was aware of what was going to happen? And presumably, if he's aware of it, he may be involved in somewhat in the planning.
If he was aware of it while he was president and didn't do anything, then he's guilty of a felony administrative omission, right? But first of all of that stuff of him walking around, like he was eating KFC on the day of the event, I think that was all staged. It was all coached by the Bannon-type people, these operatives, make him look like a simple man. It's a kind of fascist thing they do these days, I guess. I mean, he's a multi-millionaire. And but I think the plan, as we know about it now, in part because the federal police found written plan in the house of Bolsonaro's former justice minister, who was in Orlando on the 8th. He had been appointed to be justice minister of Brasilia after Lula took over by the very right-wing governor of Brasilia. And he got the position and just immediately flew up to Orlando, Florida, too. The plan was that they thought there would be enough sympathy in the army that if they caused this big commotion, they had the military police on their side, they had the governor on their side. The military police basically just opened the doors for them. There's all these images of them taking selfies with the coup, the rioters or terrorists, whatever you want to call them, taking selfies and things like that. They were all on the side. So the plan was that Lula would panic and declare a state of emergency. And this would allow the military, the army, to come in. And the army would, in their minds, switch sides and just take over the government, and there would be a military coup.
They would do something like, we need to have a new election because there's clearly some problems here, or we need to, Bolsonaro, we need to bring back his acting president and for just a year, and then we'll figure stuff out. One of those type of things. Exactly.
And it's similar to what one of Trump's advisors was suggesting that he'd do in December 2020, actually. Yep. It makes me wonder if there was any...
Wonder where he got that from, right?
Exactly.
You made the point that the legal system is different in Brazil. One of the things that I have seen, and it's no secret that that Glenn Greenwald, you mentioned The Intercept and him getting the Lava Jato hack, essentially. And there's been some questions, and you've written about the questions surrounding why only certain aspects of this leak was sort of published, and that the hacker himself was sort of disappointed that Greenwald, in the way that Greenwald released things and how much of it he released things. And so, one of my sources for what's going on in Brazil is Glenn Greenwald in English, as opposed to in Portuguese. And he has been suddenly sounding the alarm of authoritarianism in Brazil, and speaking about what's happening in Brazil in the same way you would about the United States. But there is no First Amendment in Brazil. Like, I mean, like in the same way, like there's no First Amendment in England. Like the democracy, the structure of democracy within the context of Brazil is constructed in a very different way than it is in the United States. There's more than one way to approach this. And when you talk about judges there who are overreaching, they may look like they're overreaching from the context of a U.S. Perspective, but from a Brazilian perspective, they have a different function. And that, will you walk us through that, and also how those differences in the legal system and the structure of democracy in Brazil made the calculations of what would happen different than what would have happened in the United States?
Yeah, first of all, Brazil has, they're using, in a very American style, it's not just Greenwald, but it's other people like Matthew Tyrmand and other people affiliated with Fox and with Tucker Carlson. They're weaving this narrative of this one judge, and it's very convenient for them because he's bald and he looks a little bit like Dr. Evil or something like that, or Lex Luthor. So they're making him out to be this supervillain, like this Bond villain who's engaged in overreach or something like that. What it really is that Brazil has an electoral court system that was established in 1932 that oversees all of the elements of the elections, from the tallying of the votes to creating the laws regarding campaign financing, election fraud, and enforcing the laws. So they've always had the ability to order arrests of people for committing election fraud. And so what's happening is that Greenwald and others, they're concentrating the entire system. It's one of the elements of the Brazilian rule of law, and they're treating it as if it's this one person. And it's not this court system that's making its own investigations and collective decisions, and he's just the president of that court right now. He's a because the president is always also a Supreme Court justice. So he's a Supreme Court justice, and he was appointed president for like a 2-year term of the Superior Electoral Court. So he's just doing his job. After the elections in 2018, the electoral courts ruled that all kinds of fraud had been committed on social media. They didn't exercise their power to completely cancel the election of Bolsonaro, which they could have, but they said, we're going to guarantee that it doesn't happen again. And so when the election cycle started, remembering in 2018, for example, the Bolsonaro people used big data targeting to bombard evangelical Christians with false information that the presidential candidate Fernando Haddad was a pedophile and things like that. I mean, that's illegal in Brazil. It's illegal to do these kinds of things because, segueing into the legal element, there was a brutal dictatorship. Brazil was the country that had the largest Nazi party outside of Europe in the 1930s. And there was an associated fascist movement called integralism that was much, much larger, that held an attempted coup d'etat in 1937. And a lot of their ideals permeated the brutal military dictatorship that we had down here from 1964 to 1985. So when Brazil finally got to write a new constitution in 1988, they took a lot of influence from the German constitution on how they deal with Nazism and far-right groups and things like that. And so instead of this 220-year-old concept of free speech absolutism or something, the way it's interpreted in the US Constitution, they have a concept called the harmony of rights. All human rights are important, but one human right can't be used at the expense of another human right. So, for example, you don't have the freedom of speech in Brazil to argue that Jews should be exterminated, or that, you can't publish an article saying gay people are trying to exterminate the human race or something, because that incites violence against another group of people, and they have a right to live their lives in peace, right? And in that sense, actually belonging to a Nazi party, or even saying that you support Nazism, is also a crime in Brazil. And so when this blogger, this YouTuber guy, said on the air that he thought Brazil should have its own Nazi party, he was fired. And then Glenn stepped in and helped the guy get a new job. And now this guy, on the day of the coup attempt, he was cheerleading for them. And so the electoral courts canceled his social media accounts, or temporarily, for now pending investigation. That's totally legal in Brazil. The idea of importing the United States conception of any law into another legal setting is imperialist. It's like, it's just an imperialist thing to do. And I feel like the big tech billionaires are in on this idea of exporting the US vision of free speech absolutism, because it helps reduce their liability in other countries.
Right. Right.
And so I feel like it's an entire campaign. It's not just like Glenn Greenwald or something like that. Because then you immediately have like Elon Musk agreeing with him. I think they're doing a similar thing here, and we should also say, like, the maximalist view of the First Amendment, that is also not necessarily the tradition in this country. I mean, the saying, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, has been problematically applied, within this country in ways that have inhibited leftists, because they're undermining, U.S. war efforts at times, or whatever it is. But that as a doctrine, it does make some sense, and both in the context of U.S. law, but also in terms of like respecting other people's rights. If you walk up to me with a gun, because you have a Second Amendment right, and you put it in my face, that could inhibit my free speech. And so, there is theoretically, it's impossible to escape this balance of things. And Brazil has sort of, has edified that concept legally, far more than we have adopted it here. But again, I mean, your point's made. And so